The childhood that made Elon Musk, bullied, broke, then $307 million. He was beaten so badly he ended up in the hospital. A group of boys threw him down a flight of stairs and kept beating him until he blacked out. At home, his relationship with his father was so strained that decades later, he'd publicly call him a terrible human being. And at 28 years old, that same boy sold his first company for $307 million. This isn't a movie script. This is the real childhood and early life of Elon Musk, the man behind Tesla, SpaceX, and X today. And today, in the first episode of our detailed series on him, we're breaking down exactly what short clips almost never show, how a bullied kid in Pretoria turned into someone willing, at 37, to bet absolutely everything he had. Stick around until the end. This episode has proof that Musk's very first code was so bad it had to be completely rewritten by other programmers. Even the greatest success stories don't start with genius. They start with failure. 1. A childhood in Pretoria. Elon Reeve Musk was born on June 28, 1971, in Pretoria, South Africa. His mother, May Musk, was Canadian by background, a model and dietitian. His father, Elon Musk, an engineer who, among other things, later held a stake in an emerald mine in Zambia. Musk's childhood took place in private, whites-only schools of apartheid-era South Africa, Waterkloof House Preparatory School, and later Bryanston High School. He's described his school years as genuinely difficult more than once, saying he was subjected to systematic bullying, with one episode severe enough to land him in the hospital. According to accounts, a group of peers threw him down a flight of stairs and continued beating him after he fell, until he blacked out. The home environment wasn't exactly idyllic either. His parents divorced when Elon was around 9, and his relationship with his father remained strained for decades afterward. In one interview years later, Musk publicly called his father a terrible human being. 2. A computer on a desk at age 8. It was in the middle of that difficult environment that an 8-year-old Musk got his hands on his first personal computer, an Apple II, shown to him by his father. That turned out to be a pivotal moment. The boy immersed himself in programming entirely on his own, with no formal courses or teachers. By 12, he was already a fully self-taught programmer. He wrote his own computer game called Blaster, a space shooter written in BASIC, and sold the source code to a local technology and gaming magazine for around $500. For a 12-year-old in the early 80s, that was a genuine achievement, the first proven fact of his life that something he built with his own hands could be sold for real money. 3. Fleeing the draft and moving across an ocean. In 1989, at 17 years old, Musk made the decision to emigrate to Canada, partly to avoid mandatory military service in South Africa's army at the time, and partly because his mother's Canadian background made him eligible for Canadian citizenship. From there, his path led to the University of Pennsylvania in the U.S., which he graduated from in 1997 with 2 bachelor's degrees at once, in physics and economics. After that, he was accepted into a PhD program in material science at Stanford University. And here's the moment worth pointing out specifically. He attended that PhD program for exactly 2 days before dropping out to found his own company instead. 4. The risky start of Zip2. In 1995, Musk and his younger brother Kimball founded Zip2, an online directory and mapping service for newspapers, essentially an early version of what would later become standard online maps and business directories. The idea was simple but genuinely relevant for the mid-90s, helped traditional newspapers, which held huge databases of local business information, get online with maps and directory listings, before that became a mass-market standard. 5. The proof that even he didn't start out perfect. And now, the proof I promised at the top. The code Musk wrote himself for an early Zip2 prototype turned out to be so tangled and poorly structured that a significant portion of it later had to be completely rewritten by more experienced programmers the company hired afterward. What's more, according to people who worked with him during that period, Musk turned out to be a fairly harsh and not particularly effective manager early on. He openly expressed frustration, for instance, if employees didn't stay late at work, which eventually led to an internal conflict serious enough that the board effectively removed him as CEO of the company at one point, though he remained a major shareholder and chairman of the board. This is an important detail often left out of the mythologized retellings. Even the founder of a company that would sell for hundreds of millions of dollars a few years later started out writing code that had to be rewritten and managed a team poorly enough to be temporarily removed from leadership. 6. The compact sale and the first real fortune. Despite all the internal turbulence, Zip2 managed to secure partnerships with major newspaper publishers and expand its market presence. In 1999, the company was acquired by Compaq for approximately $307 million. Musk, who owned roughly 7% of the company, personally walked away with around $22 million from that deal. For a 28-year-old who, just a few years earlier, had been bullied at school on the other side of the world, that was an enormous turn of fortune. According to people who knew him at the time, one of his first major purchases with that money was a McLaren F1 supercar, one of the rarest and most expensive cars of its era, which he later crashed and reportedly didn't hesitate to talk about in a CNN interview afterward. Even then, by some biographers' accounts, it was noticeable that Musk was drawn not just to money for its own sake, but to a certain amount of publicity and fame as part of the image of a successful entrepreneur. 7. He didn't stop there. He bet again immediately. Most people receiving $22 million at 28 years old would have considered that the end of the story. Musk treated that money as starting capital for his next, even more ambitious bet. Already in 1999, he almost immediately founded X.com, an online financial services and money transfer company. In 2000, X.com merged with a company called Confinity, founded by Peter Thiel and Max Levchin, and that merger produced a company the whole world would soon come to know as PayPal. Wrap up. Let's bring the key facts of this first episode together. 1. Musk's childhood in Pretoria included serious, systematic bullying up to and including hospitalization after a beating, along with a strained relationship with his father. 2. At 8, his father introduced him to his first computer, an Apple II, and by 12, he was already a fully self-taught programmer who sold his first written game for $500. 3. At 17, he immigrated to Canada, partly to avoid mandatory military service in South Africa, then transferred to the University of Pennsylvania, where he earned 2 bachelor's degrees at once. For he dropped out of a Stanford PhD program after 2 days to found his first company, Zip2, with his brother. 5. His own early code was bad enough to be rewritten by other programmers, and he was at one point removed as CEO of his own company due to management problems. 6. Despite all of that, Zip2 was sold to Compaq for $307 million in 1999, personally netting Musk around $22 million. And 7. Instead of stopping there, he almost immediately put that capital into his next, even riskier project, X.com, which would later become PayPal. The main takeaway from this first episode is simple. Musk's story doesn't start with genius or some innate gift for business. It starts with a difficult childhood, a mediocre start as a manager, and code that had to be rewritten behind him, and it was the willingness to immediately risk everything again after that first success. Not the success itself that shaped everything that came after. In the next episode, we'll break down how X.com became PayPal, how Musk got removed as CEO for a second time in his life, and how the $1.5 billion eBay deal gave him the capital for the riskiest bet of his entire career. Leave a comment and tell me what surprised you most about this episode. And subscribe. There are 6 more parts of this series still to come.